Hey guys, it's Iconic here, and in this video we're going to be showcasing my new build, Wintertide Brand Occultist. The real power from Wintertide Brand comes in the form of its cheapness. It doesn't really require you to have items beyond your skill tree. Like you can scale your damage pretty well with items, but for a league start scenario where you have no idea what you're going to drop, you don't want to rely on like finding chance currencies or even finding some uniques. This is the perfect build for you. It doesn't require any uniques, and the items it does have, they buff its damage a good amount, but you have excellent wave clear without it. So with all that out of the way, what exactly is Wintertide Brand, you may ask? Wintertide Brand is a brand skill which attaches to an enemy and then applies a cold damage over time debuff to them. It activates every so often, and each time it activates, it gains more, basically multiplicative damage up until a max of 20 stages. Now, this brand is at its core single target. However, its great wave clear, like I said earlier, comes in the form of constantly detaching the brand, because once this brand detaches, the cold damage over time debuff that was applied to the enemy gets spread across every mob in its vicinity, right? So once you're able to consistently detach the brand, you have very, very good wave clear, very good AoE damage. Now, how do we detach the brand? Starting out, the only real way to detach it, just level 1, for example, would be to kill an enemy. You drop the brand, it attaches to an enemy, it starts ticking, the enemy dies, it spreads the dots. However, this is why the build scales so quickly and so early. It comes in the form of this brand mastery. What does this brand mastery do, you may ask? It attaches to a new enemy each time it activates, no more than once every 0.3 seconds. What this means is every time Wintertide brand attaches to or attaches itself for 0.3 seconds, it is going to essentially detach and reattach. So it essentially spreads the dot debuff every 0.3, 0.4 seconds, depending on how often you activate. It's just going to activate once as soon as it can, because it activates so frequently. Now that we understand what Wintertide Brand is and how it functions, we need to understand how to scale it, because you may think it's just a cold damage over time, so we scale it the same way as cold dot, and that is to some degree true. You do scale it the same way you scale other cold dots. However, you do also want to scale it with something that doesn't benefit the other cold dots in any way, shape, or form, and this is cast speed. What does cast speed do? Cast speed for Wintertide Brand reduces the amount of time between each activation. So say it was going to activate at base every 0.25 seconds, like it says on the tooltip. With more cast speed, it goes down to like 0.25 or 0.15. And the key here is you want to get cast speed to the point where you can easily hit max stacks of 20 stages within its duration. So to scale this as effectively, we are going to want to increase its duration, so the brand actually stays up and keeps itself alive more, as well as its attach frequency, so that you get to the max stacks ASAP, so it does the most amount of damage it can do while it is up, if that makes sense. So you really want to find that balance between skill effect, duration, and cast speed, as well as scaling the actual damage over time and cold damage that scales alongside other cold dots. This is the reason we aren't really going too hard into like spreading to different cold dots, like say cold snap and vortex and all. Like we use those skills, but for different reasons that you might guess upfront. So one of the goals going into this build was finding a good middle ground for where we balance all the things I mentioned before: cast speed, damage over time, skill effect, duration, and I think we've achieved a very, very good amount of everything, to the point where this build was literally my favorite going into Crucible League. And we maintain a bit of complexity while keeping the build very easy to play. What does that mean? We use a whole lot of skills without really using a whole lot of skills. For example, we are going occultist for the reason of we want to have AoE through Profane Bloom. What does profane? I mean, we all know what profane bloom does, but just in case, when you curse an enemy and they die, they explode for 50% of their health, or they have a 50% chance to explode for a quarter of their health rather. So you want as many cursed enemies as you can get. However, to manually curse enemies before you actually kill them can be a bit tiresome, and it can be very iffy for wave clear. So what do we do? We opt to use Vortex along with Hex Touch, which applies a curse when you damage an enemy with the skill, as well as Hex Bloom, which then spreads the hexes even further when they want from dead enemies, if that makes sense. So what happens is you run forward, a vortex touches an enemy, they get cursed with frostbite, and then once they die and explode through profane bloom, this just creates a chain reaction where you have all the enemies picking up curses and just dying all along, and then your Wintertide brands are also jumping to different enemies within a certain radius, also furthering this explosion chain. It's very satisfying seeing it actually like come together. One thing to note about Wintertide brand is that it is very, very hard to calculate, especially with PoB. There are a couple of, this thing here is the closest we can have to somewhat accurate Wintertide brand calculations, and even then it's not the most accurate. So the damage numbers are going to look very, very skewed because we actually cannot properly calculate the Wintertide brand damage. And you may notice I'm also adding resistances, but the only reason I'm doing this is because I like to leave every defensive slot open in terms of resistances, so you can just mix and match as you need. But with that said, you do want max resistances of all of them, and with this build we are actually shooting for even more than res cap being 75. We're actually going for somewhere along the lines of 80 something percent maximum res. I have gone ahead and fixed the Wintertide brand modifiers to actually properly depict our max fire res, cold res, and lightning res, so you have a better picture of like a more accurate effective hit pool, and just so you do not have it think it's actually squishier than it actually is, because it's actually a pretty tanky build. That said, we achieve a lot of our tankiness from a unique, so this is by no means mandatory. However, it does give us a lot of bonuses. For example, it gives us a whole lot of elemental resistances, or max elemental resistance, I mean, so we essentially mitigate a lot more elemental damage. It also just straight up cancels critical strikes. So we take just the same base damage as we would from regular hits that we do from critical strikes, which is really nice against certain mods. Makes us very, very good into like monsters have X% critical strike damage, multi map mods and whatnot. It's very nice, and then the increased armor is just the icing on the cake. In terms of uniques, we also go for Eye of Malice, which increases the fire and cold resistances of our enemies. But it actually might be confusing for you, but this is actually debuffing the enemies. And how does this work? Well, when the way resistances calculate is if the enemy already has a negative fire or resistance, and then you add some more, it actually goes the opposite way, where it deducts from that fire and cold res. So all you need is for enemies to have a below 0 fire and cold res, and with the exposures we have, with the double cursing, because we do double curse with our ascendancies, there is no way they're gonna have positive they're not gonna have positive resistances, and as such this is just nothing but positives all through the helmet, which is why we opt for the Eye of Malice. Everything else is just generic. You just want to look for the stats that I mentioned here. If you want, you really want cast speed here, you really want dot multis, you want level of all, spell skill gems, and cool skill gems. Pick and choose what you can get, but just know, like I said, league starts, you do not really have to worry about the mods too much, just because the build carries itself in terms of the skill tree. So in the way of flasks, we opt for a Progenesis because we have a lot of life regen on this build. And with the Progenesis, what happens is you then mitigates some of the damage you take from upfront damage to being a slow damage over time, which is then cancelled out by the fact that we have insane life regen. So by using this, we actually make it so we do not even need to use a life flask. And before we have the currency for Progenesis, because Progenesis can be quite expensive, we actually are going to be opting for a Forbidden Taste, if I can find it. We're going to be opting for a Forbidden Taste. And what this does is, I think I have mentioned this in a previous video, but if you take a savage hit, and this enchantment is very important, when you take a savage hit, what happens is, when you take a savage hit, which is defined as a hit that does, I think, over 20% of your max health at once, this applies the life on use, and you want 100% life on use. So essentially what that does is, if you were to take a very big hit that's going to one-shot you, essentially, say you have 4k health and the hit actually does 4k damage, so you're going to melt, die, right? In that instance where you take the 4k health, this will be used and applied to your character before the damage is deducted from your health, thereby giving you 8k effective health, where that 4k then leaves, and then you have to take 25% of that as chaos damage every second for its duration. So ideally, you actually want a bottom quality 0% for this. You don't want to increase its duration. But this is a pseudo anti one-shot engine in and of itself, and it's really good once you have your life regen in place. Otherwise, just go for a regular if you don't like it, just go for a regular healing flask. There's nothing wrong with just going with the life flask. I like having my flask automated, so this is how I decide to opt in most of the time for life regen, essentially. Then we go for a Rumi's Concoction, because we are trying to push our spell block and our regular block chance for as high as we can. We do opt in for Glancing Blows, which makes us take damage when we block hits, but it's essentially, the reason we're going for Glancing Blows is because we do not want to opt in for spell suppression, and without Glancing Blows we have a 41% spell block chance. So for 2 out of, let's just say, for 60% of the hits, the spells that hit us, we're going to take damage for it, which without spell suppression actually kind of still hits hard. Now granted, the ones that we do dodge, we remove the damage completely, but I find with Glancing Blows, just reducing everything to 65% and blocking a whole lot more, it tends to balance out in the end. Also, while this build is fantastic at wave clearing and just mowing down mobs, its single target is where it starts to fall off, especially when you push towards the end game. So while this build isn't going to kill your uber mavens and you know, uber serious and whatnot, this build is best for farming strategies that have you clear a whole bunch of mobs and just basically wave clear. So think things like Blight. It's good for Legion, Abyss. Those are kind of what the build specializes at. And if you want something that's more single target or more balanced in terms of single target and clear, you might want to look at my Forbidden Rites totem, which I will probably be linking down below. So with all that said, I'll be ending the video here so it doesn't get too long. If you have any questions, feel free to drop it down below in the comment section. I will be answering everything. And I hope you enjoyed this build as much as I have. I've had a lot of fun. It's made me a whole lot of currency in the past league. This is the build that I used when I found my mirror drop, which blew my mind, by the way. But that's me digressing. Anyways, have a good rest of your day.